What's up, Dub Nation? This is Rich at Let's Go Warriors. And today we're going to follow up my last video because GP2 opted in yesterday on his $9 million contract. So let's take a look at what this means. First off, looking at the video that I did just before this, so much for that idea, the non-taxpayer mid-level exception. But first of all, I did want to thank our loyal guest commenter, Shivansh. Look at that comment. Really appreciate that. Your kindness fuels my passion, refuels my passion, reinforces what I do here. And this was such a good video and all that. Of course, you're going to get a hater here and there. And at the bottom, there's this guy that said, this didn't really age well. You know, he's actually right. But let me explain why I did what I did, and I went through that exercise to uncover that we could have gotten under the tax and maybe been able to shop for a free agent up to $13 million or $12.9 million to be exact. But those plans are pretty much shellacked now that Gary Payton II has opted in to his $9 million contract. And let's go on an aside real quick. This news was broken by Kendra Andrews at 9:05 yesterday. And then Anthony Slater followed up with a whole article that said, with an accompanying tweet, sources confirm. So Kendra really did break the news, and this was posted at 9:14. Usually it's Shams Charania, to no one's surprise, of The Athletic, that breaks this type of news, or it's Anthony Slater himself, along with Shams. Both of them work at The Athletic. But interestingly, it was Kendra Andrews. And I think it's because Gary Payton, he's from Oakland. His agent, Aaron Goodwin, is from Oakland. Kendra Andrews is from Oakland. There's kind of a Oakland vibe on that one. So this is why I went through that exercise in the first place. And not only did my video not age well, but so did Joe Lacob's quote unquote Plan 1A. And this is something I'll link in the description, is a podcast with Tim Kawakami and Joe Lacob on the TK show. So Kawakami, I'm not going to play long segments. I'm only going to play short segments out of respect for the podcast. You can go check it out. And the question that Kawakami asked Lacob is, what is your thoughts about the second apron? Here's Joe Lacob's response.
Going into the going into next season, you will not be in the second
I'll
apron.
go beyond that. I'll tell you that our plan 1 or 1A is actually, we'd like to be out of the tax.
Yeah, he'd like to be out of the tax. That seems nearly impossible. But yet the last video I showed you that I did here explained how we could do that. So that was literally Joe Lacob saying that getting out of the tax was Plan 1A back on February 14th, which is right before the trade deadline. I should mention that the day before yesterday, on June 18th, the Warriors had to wire $176.9 million to the NBA. Lacob has told Kawakami in previous podcasts before that doing that wire to the NBA is painful, obviously. The other reason that I thought that the Warriors might be able to get under the tax is because Gary Payton himself said at his exit interview, and this is way back on April 18th, a couple days after the season ended with the elimination by the Sacramento Kings, Gary Payton himself said that he would consider redoing his contract, which would greatly help in the Warriors getting under the tax. So here's what he said.
You see yourself being a key part of the team next year? And
I hope so. I would love to come back and, and run it back, or better yet, just redo my whole deal and, stay here for a little bit longer. So,
yeah. So check that one out. I'll put a card and the link in the description as well. That's on our website. And by the way, this particular video also includes Wiggins in the interview, so check that out. So what does that tell us? What have we learned in this process? Well, first of all, you never know what a player and an agent is thinking. And this video was back in April. A couple months have passed since. Times change. Just the other day, or actually yesterday, Rich Paul went with the strategy of revealing what teams are interested in Bronny James. Rather unprecedented strategy by an agent. And then I've been told, bonus for you that are watching this video, I've been told by an NBA agent that Gary Payton was never going to not opt in on the 9 million. So it's kind of like you're sitting and going, well, if he was never going to do that, then why did he tell the press that he was considering not opting in, right? So I just think that we can learn a few things from this and just sit back and observe rather than jump to conclusions, although I'm going to speculate a little bit. So what does this mean? Before I come to this particular article, let's take a look at the math that I did for that particular exercise, the last video that we had here. So now that Gary Payton has opted in on his $9 million contract, you can see here now this updated salary cap sheet has Gary at 9 million, and that puts us only 5 million under the salary cap. So we cannot get a free agent that is going to command more than $5 million. So Paul George might say on his podcast that he wants to play for a team that's not necessarily going for a championship, but more playing the right way. And Warriors fans might kind of look at that and kind of go, oh, maybe we got a chance for Paul George. Well, this spreadsheet tells you that there's no chance for Paul George. You can only sign free agents on the open market for whatever space you have under the salary cap of 141 million. And our total salary, even if Klay Thompson walks, there's only 5 million left. And so this kind of tells me that in order for us to shave a few million here and there, like I explained in my last video, that's not happening anymore, because now Gary Payton contract is in there locked in at 9 million. Does that mean that maybe they don't expect Klay to come back? Or because the whole plan of him taking 24 million, which is what Draymond makes this year, or maybe a little bit less, and then we'll give you 4 years for 100 million. I don't know if that holds anymore. So maybe the Warriors already knew that. Maybe Gary Payton knew that. And if you look at this ESPN article from Bobby Marks the other day, he makes some predictions on contracts. In this article, he predicts that Klay will get offered 70 million for 2 years from Orlando. Now, 70 million for 2 years from Orlando, that's an average of 35 million. And that's an increase from Bobby Marks's last estimate of 30 million. So he thought Klay, about a month ago, he thought Klay would get 30 million out on the open market. And now he's saying 35 million. And if you're the Warriors, you see Klay made 43 million last year, and to fill this in at 35 million, it just doesn't seem right. We certainly didn't get the value that we wanted. When you're paying a guy 43 million and you have a superstar at 51 million, that's supposed to be a playoff team, and we didn't even make the playoffs. So the Warriors are kind of in this weird dynamic where they got to make the playoffs. They got to win more regular season games, which quite honestly, the Warriors themselves, as well as the fans, have been spoiled over the last several years, largely due to the Kevin Durant era. When regular season games, they could sort of just ease on through, right? And so does that mean we're on to plan 1B? What is plan 1B? Well, actually, Joe Lacob revealed plan 1B right after he explained plan 1A to Tim Kawakami. And here it is.
We could go even further than that, and we could make big changes if we had to. If this team, were to go slide all the way down here and not do well at the end of the year, there's going to be big changes.
So back to our salary cap table. Well, we might be seeing some big changes. And if you would ask me right now is not the same as June 30th or July 1st when Klay Thompson has to make a decision, or very close to coming to make a decision. We'll have to see if the market needs to kind of wait on Paul George. Klay plays the same position as Paul George. But as far as Klay fitting into this, it doesn't really seem like it, especially with Gary now at the 9 million, because this kind of puts us in a spot where we're continually paying luxury taxes and repeater penalties. So we'll see. Now, I'm going to bring in Dean Chambers to give us some optimism because that's what he's good at. But before we do that, I wanted to do this post-production edit, an addendum that kind of explains some mistakes that I made. You will have seen earlier in this video. I confused salary cap with the tax. So the salary cap is 141 million. The tax line is 171 million. So that's where you would start having to pay luxury tax. So I just wanted to clarify that. And with this spreadsheet, you can see that when Lacob says, I want to get under the tax, that essentially means that he's not going to pay Klay more than 32 million. There's about 32 million available to sign Klay, which is pretty competitive with the 35 million bandied about by Bobby Marks, as I mentioned. But this also means you got to waive Looney, and there's a 3 million charge. Now, if you're waiving Looney, preferably you would like to trade him to a team that has cap space and maybe get a pick out of it, second round pick, maybe, what have you. Get something out of it and not have to have this salary cap hit just for waiving Looney. So I wanted to add that little aside as well. Nevertheless, 32 million still seems today, as I record this on June 21st, seems a bit fiscally irresponsible in that we would be bringing back almost the same team minus Chris Paul. And I'm just not sure that you can do that and hope to improve all that much. You'd like to make roster moves. And we'll discuss this in a future separate Klay video dedicated to everything Klay. And we'll dissect everything. But usually GMs tend to make changes, at least one major change. Last season, it was Chris Paul instead of Jordan Poole, and other dominoes fell there. Obviously, we had the new draft picks and Dario Saric. But in terms of really tipping the scale, you'd have to make a major move. And if you bring back Klay Thompson and he agrees to a $32 million deal coming back, that means you haven't really made any major changes other than waive Chris Paul. You haven't brought anybody new in. And you probably have to waive Chris Paul because then you'd be going over the tax. In fact, the 30 million, as you can see from the spreadsheet work here, would put you, along with Klay Thompson, that would be 62 more million to this line right here, which should be near 200 million, which is obviously an enormous number that would put you in the second apron, and nobody wants to be in the second apron due to the restrictive issues with that. So then you start looking at the salary cap sheet and you say, okay, what if we traded Wiggins? The problem with that, and we'll discuss that in a separate Wiggins video coming up, is that first of all, Wiggins is your best defender. Out of all these guys, he's probably the only guy that can stay in front of an elite player. And we just did a rewatch of all 6 games from the 2022 NBA Finals, and you hope that he can go back to being the second best player in the 2022 NBA Finals. But he's a depressed asset since then. And so he doesn't really have market value, at least not at this 26 million level. So who could you get back in return? And that's why I kind of have a sense that Klay might not be staying with the Warriors as of today, but we'll see on July 1st. But those are all my kind of different angles on the Klay situation, which is interrelated with all the other situations, namely that it's intuitively seems like it's difficult to move Wiggins. So admittedly, I'm a little bit pessimistic about Klay staying with the Warriors, but what we do here at Let's Go Warriors is focus on optimism. So we've got our buddy Dean Chambers is ready to come in and infuse some optimism. So hang on while I bring him in. Dean Chambers,
How's it going, Rich?
tell us why we should feel like Klay is going to stay with the Warriors.
Well, first and foremost, it's the fact that I don't think he's going to leave without giving the Warriors a counter offer. He is going to give Joe, Lacob, Steve Kerr, Steph Curry, Draymond Green. He's going to give them a chance to make a counter offer. I believe, because I find it impossible after everything that they've been through together that wouldn't be the case. And
Hey, can I interject then right there?
Yeah.
Okay, let me be the pessimist.
okay,
What if Lacob has already made up his mind that 35 million for the next 2 years, so 70 million over 2 years, is just too steep for what they want to do?
well, I guess if you're talking specifically about the 35 million for 2 years, which is what seems to be on the table from the Magic, I can see that, but I do think the Warriors can get somewhat close to that number from much more years, and I have seen that Clay's looking for a third year, fourth year for security, perhaps, or a player option in the fourth year. And I guess 35 million a year is a lot of money, and that would be a little bit difficult for the Warriors to get there. You're right, but I don't think that's the only thing on his mind. I think if the Warriors have a plan to show him how this is a competitive offer for around the league, right? Whatever the offer is that we're talking about here, and they have a way to put really good players around him, and for him to remain a Warrior for life and the legacy and everything like that. I think I don't think he's so hard set on leaving that he would refuse to even listen to that.
And you're actually right, because I've actually heard from my people that pretty close to Klay that it isn't about the money. And yet I think it's more complicated than that. Everything overlaps to everything else. So that doesn't mean that I suddenly change my pessimism into optimism, but it does change every day. And it depends on little more morsel of information here and there. I have heard some things about just, and put it this way, going 0 for 10, there's different angles. And there's the angle of Klay that not many people know about. That part that I've heard, very confusing to me, and probably will never be privy to more information than that. But I will say that I think you're right. Your gut feeling is correct that it really isn't about the money, black and white. So based on that, and your idea that I've adopted that I really like, is pay him the 100 million. That looks like a really nice figure. Spread it out over 4 years. So we'll see.
The Warriors must have been preparing for this, I think, for Payton to opt in. I'm not sure he could have opted out and re-signed with the Warriors without going through waiver wires, without taking that cap hold off of the team anyway. And it's one more year, so him and Looney combined have 17.1 million coming off the books at the end of this season. And you imagine with the kind of relationships that they have, it wouldn't be the craziest thing to see both of those guys potentially coming back for a combined 6.5, 7 million rather than 17, with two minimum contracts. So I think the Warriors have been preparing for GP2 to opt in for quite some time now. If Klay is getting those kind of numbers on the free market, is he not worth that to the Dubs? Because I don't think even a larger contract would put us into the second apron, and that's the real
Yeah.
We can't go over that at all. We just can't.
Yeah, that's why I love talking through things with you. Well, the way that I looked at it in the video that I just did before you hopped on is that when I look at the salary cap sheet and see that he made 43 million last year, X, Y, and Z happened. We finished in the play-in, 10 games over 500, those kinds of things. Then you kind of go, well, now we're going to kind of run it back. Let's call it 35 million instead of 43. I don't know. It doesn't feel right from a team management perspective, from a financial management of the salary cap sheet. But then again, what do I know? I mean, I have very little experience with this. Does it even matter what he made before? Things of that nature. So glad you brought it up.
You know, I think if he really is worth that, because we have the bird rights, I kind of feel like, okay, well, let's offer more years and see if we can negotiate based off of that. If what Klay's seeing, the 100 million, for instance, that we were talking about, if he's not seeing like, well, that won't actually push us over the top, well, then I think it's so important just for the legacy and for all of that to bring him back, that if that's what it takes, I think you just bite the bullet. And that's kind of what I feel maybe Steph might also feel, and Draymond, of course. It's great talking with you about this stuff, though, because there's so many different, like, he's just playing around, or like, oh, he's definitely gone, and just trying to calmly figure out what makes sense for both sides. That's what I love talking to you about this stuff, Rich, and it's awesome.
And likewise, I mean, you kind of brought me out of the dark place. So thank you for that. And we'll see everybody on the next live stream, hopefully. What I want to do here is something I forgot to do last video, to share the Just Us outro that we always do on our live streams. So let's go ahead and do that. You ready for that, Dean?
Yes, sir.
Here we go. Just Us and Brate. Thank you, Dean.
Thank you, Rich.